I accept this wonderful gift, pleasure, whatever, feeling that it's come about really because this is my family and this is my home. I did come here in 1954, as Paul mentioned, and it's been a very wonderful time for me. And ever since I've been here, I've learned to feel that this is increasingly my intellectual home. And it's with that spirit that I'm happy to receive this. Now, having been here quite some time, I'm very much in mind of the fact that we're approaching the centennial year of the hospital where this will hang in the future. And I worry and think a good deal about the history of the first century and what the second century might bring. I'm grateful to Barry Collar and to Elizabeth Hanson for working on the Centennial Committee and preparing a wonderful series of vignettes, of stories about things that happened in the hospital, particularly the singular achievements of individuals in the hospital. And there are many, and they're really very great. But there's a vignette that I'd like to tell you tonight that never will appear in those vignettes. It's a totally different kind of story. It's very personal and relates very much to the hospital and the nature of the things that go on in it. And the story is of a 19-year-old boy, an immigrant boy who came to this country from terrible straits in Eastern Europe, poverty, bigotry, no hope for the future, no opportunity for him. And he came to this country, and when he left Ellis Island, he came to a relative of his who was a chap who had left that part of Eastern Europe earlier and had a small grocery store in what is now Sutton Place, but then was a dreadful place. It was the dead end. It was the end of 57th Street, and crowds of criminal boys and girls and crooks of all varieties and descriptions held out in the East End. And this chap had his little grocery store there, and my person we're talking about came and was offered the opportunity to become Americanized, live there and work there in this store. So he was given the menial jobs. He swept the floor, washed things up, carried things around, delivered packages, and so on. But occasionally he had some days off. And on one of his first days off, which was in March 1909, he saw a crowd of people on the Manhattan end of the Queensboro Bridge. So he walked over to see what might be going on and couldn't quite make it out, except they all seemed to walk across the bridge, so he did the same thing. He knew very little English, but he kind of figured out what was happening. It was opening day of the Queensboro Bridge. And he was quite amazed, actually, because there was great activity at this end, but on the other side, it seemed to end in a pasture. There was nothing going on. He was very supportive of all the ideas of America and what might happen here, and wondered what this was about. And the thought came to him that they're building a bridge to nowhere, a bridge from somewhere to nowhere, and he thought about that a good deal and decided that maybe the American way to do things is to build bridges to nowhere, because that's how you make somewheres. Out of the nowhere will come a somewhere. And over the years that went on, he watched the building of Brooklyn and of Long Island and was very convinced of how wonderful this American dream was. Then another day, he went wandering farther afield, and he came up to the East 60s, and he saw a building being built on what was then Avenue A. Had no idea what it was. There was one building present and another one being built. And of course, it was 1909. It was the hospital, our very own hospital that was being built. And he watched this. He was enormously impressed by the iron fence that went around the whole old Schermerhorn estate, the land that had been bought by the Rockefellers for our Rockefeller University now. And he found out, having been here some time, could speak a bit more English, what this was all about. And someone told him, Mr. Rockefeller is building it. He thought to himself, that's right, because he remembered back in his country, the rich, the nobility, the princes, they built great estates for themselves, usually hunting lodges or places to have winter orgies or whatever when they were not in Paris or Monte Carlo. And he thought Mr. Rockefeller's up to the same. That person, oh no, that's not what he's doing at all. He's building a hospital here, and this is going to be a hospital and not a place for himself. And it's a place that they're going to study sick people to learn things about disease. And this young boy thought, well, it's sort of like that bridge, isn't it? It's sort of building from something we understand, the disease, to nowhere, and then making out of that nowhere a somewhere. Again, he thought this was the wonderful thing of America. Now, I know a lot about that man and what was in his mind at each of these steps, because that man is my father. And my father told me these stories about his early life in the streets around the Rockefeller Institute for Medical Research, as it was then known. As a matter of fact, after I came here, I brought him to meet Det Bronk, and we had an extraordinary talk together. It was rather tearful. The two of them were reminiscing about the old days and thinking very much about the future, and they became friends and often visited together over the years to come. And now I think back very much on my father and his feelings about this, and my own feelings about the fact that during the years after he left this area, and the years even before I came, in the early part of the last century, this place became an extraordinary force for good in science and medicine and in the cure of human illness. We're at different days now. What hospitals and what clinical research centers do are somewhat different. They no longer follow the patterns of the past, but it changes greatly from time to time. And I have the feeling that some of the great things that happened in this hospital, like the discovery of DNA, the birth of modern clinical chemistry and the Van Slyke laboratories, and so on, these many vignettes that will be described in the forthcoming book, are a symbol of what the future can hold, and also the fact that if we but stick to what the original founders of this institution meant it to be, a place for the observation and the intensive and careful study of human disease, it'll be spectacular again in the century to come. And I just want you to know that whatever does happen, I'll be hanging around and watching you guys. Be careful.